If you've got your Bible, why don't you turn with me to Matthew chapter 14. It's a passage that we all know very well. And many times as we come to a familiar passage, you'll see at the top of your Bible, in Matthew chapter 14, you've got Jesus feeding the 5,000. You've got the heading around just before that, John the Baptist has been beheaded. And Jesus is now trying to get away by himself to pray and to understand what's gone on in his life over the last few days. With his cousin dying. And he goes to a solitary place. And a crowd follows him, and 5,000 people or men are there, women and children plus, so it's probably close to 10 or 15,000. And he feeds them with a couple of loaves of bread and a few fish. And he then says, I need to get away again. And so he says to his disciples, get in the boat and go across the lake to a place that you know. I'm going up the mountain to pray. So immediately you know the story. There's a storm. But let's read it for a moment together. Matthew chapter 14 from verse 22. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get in the boat and go before him to the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now when evening came, he was alone there, but the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them walking on the water. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it is a ghost. And they were cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. So he said, come. And when Peter had got down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him, and said to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when he got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, truly, you are God's Son. It's an incredible passage that we've all heard and we know the story well. And I want to ask you this morning, let's just be honest with each other for a little bit. If you were following Jesus, which of you would have followed Jesus on the water? Which of you would have been the one that got out the boat and said, yeah, I'm going to follow you, Jesus. I'm going to get out. Some of us think we would, but a lot of us, if we're honest with ourselves, would stop and say, you know what? I'm probably a little bit more like the disciples, looking at Peter saying, you're at it again, Pete. You really going to do this? We like to think we'd be Peter. I know I would. But if I'm honest with myself, I'm probably a little bit more like the disciples, saying, well, let's just hang back and see what's going to happen. So they're in the boat. They've gone out into the boat. And a storm comes up. First point I want to make to you this morning around this. Sometimes God is going to lead you into a storm to accomplish a greater good. Let me say it again. Sometimes God may lead you into a storm to accomplish a greater good. Storms in life are unavoidable. You don't have to be a brain surgeon to know that. You just have to live in South Africa. We all understand there's storms that come around us all the time. But I want to ask you this question this morning as we look at the disciples in this boat and in this storm. Why were they in the boat? Jesus, it says in the first verse in verse 22 or 32, Jesus made them get in the boat. It was Jesus' idea for them to get in the boat. It wasn't their decision. They didn't say, well, we know what's going to happen. Jesus wants to go pray. Well, we'll just get ahead of him and go to the other side. Jesus said to them, no, get in the boat. So they were where they were meant to be. Now, if Jesus knows everything, why would he ask his disciples to get in the boat knowing there was going to be a storm? You ever thought of that? Why? We all say Jesus knows everything, he's in control. So why did Jesus decide and not just allow, but tell them, get in the boat and go to the other side? As we read the story, I think it's because there was another lesson that Jesus wanted to teach his disciples. If you know your Bible, you'll know that this is not the first storm that the disciples have been in with Jesus. In Mark chapter 4, verse 35 to verse 41, the disciples are in a boat going across the same lake. Jesus this time is with them, but Jesus goes to sleep at the back of the boat. He's fast asleep, and the Bible tells us that the storm comes up, the wind is blowing, the waves are coming in again, and Jesus is asleep at the back of the boat. And they get to a point where the disciples finally say, they come and they wake Jesus up and they say, Teacher, Jesus, don't you care that we're about to die? Don't you care that we're going to drown here, Jesus? How many times do you and I do that in our lives? There's a storm that comes up, stuff is happening, we're praying, things are not going the way we want it to, and we come to Jesus and say, God, don't you care? Don't you know what's going on here, Lord? Haven't you seen my bank balance? Lord, have you seen the situation in the economy? Have you seen what the politicians are saying? Have you heard what they're saying? God, don't you care? And Jesus wakes up. And I wonder for a moment when he woke up to the back of the boat, and I love sailing. I've spent most of my life sailing and playing on boats and dams and rivers and on the sea. And I love being in water. But I don't understand how, looking at the size of the type of boats that they had in those days, how Jesus could actually have been asleep. But he's asleep in this boat, and he wakes up and he gets up. And I almost wonder, if they're busy saying, Jesus, don't you care? Almost accusing him, saying, Jesus, aren't you aware of what's going on? Now, I wonder if Jesus got up and he sort of looked at the disciples, and he got to the edge of the boat and he looked at the water and he said, be still. And immediately it says, the waves calmed down, and the disciples' response is different. The disciples say, it says they're filled with great fear, and they say, Teacher. Say, Teacher. When the wind died down, they became perfectly calm. He said to them, why are you afraid? And they became very much afraid and said to one another, who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? So this first storm in Mark 4, the disciples recognize that Jesus is a teacher, and they recognize that the wind and the waves obey him, but they're still in fear. They're still wondering, who is this man? And what is going on here? How many times do we say to God, don't you care about me? Don't you care about the situation? We recognize Jesus as a teacher. We may even follow his teachings. We may even follow and say, yeah, what Jesus has to say is good, that's helpful. But we're still caught in fear. See, friends, the problem is when we allow fear to control our thinking and our speaking, we take over control. We try and control it. And haven't you realized or haven't you experienced this? I know I have, that when I'm trying to control stuff because I'm afraid, things never go well. You're in a meeting with a boss or an employee and your boss and you're afraid and you speak out of fear. What happens? You say the wrong thing. Maybe you jump into a relationship that later you regret. Or you take an opportunity in a business decision and out of fear and out of anxiety, and then what happens, it doesn't turn out the way you think it is, and you find yourself coming back to God and saying, God, if only I had waited, or if only I had listened to you. See, when we're afraid and we allow fear to control us, we make bad decisions and we rush God. But we're human, aren't we? And we're going to face fear. And there are going to be fearful situations. But we need to start to see, and we'll go on a little longer now, or see how the disciples in the second storm handle their fear and respond to what Jesus is doing. So what happens in the storm? Jesus gets up and he speaks, and immediately the storm is calmed. So what do the disciples learn here? They first come to understand that fear, or that peace does not come from the absence of fear or the absence of a storm, but it comes from the authoritative word of Jesus. Didn't you love that song we sang earlier on? The last song before we ended the service, the worship time. Your word is true. Things change on your authority. One word from you, things change on your authority. Friends, we need to learn that. We need to understand that fear or storms will always be there. But peace is not going to come, or peace doesn't come from the absence of a storm. Peace comes from a word from God. Peace doesn't come from a perfect life. Peace doesn't come from a perfect job. Peace doesn't come from perfect finances or a perfect relationship. Peace comes to you and I through an authoritative word from Jesus. But still, they only respond to him as teacher. Next main point for this morning: God's ultimate goal for your life is not your comfort, but your character and your faith. See, God will allow storms in your and my lives to develop things in us. Matthew 14, verse 24 says, by this time the boat was already a long distance from the land, tossed to and fro and battered by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus came to them, walking on the water. Again, they were terrified and said to each other, it is a ghost. Pay attention for a moment. We don't like this point. When did Jesus show up? Was it at the beginning of the storm? Was it in the middle of the storm? It was at the fourth watch. That is between 3 and 6 a.m. Think about it for the moment. The disciples got in the boat, it says, as evening came, just after supper. They just fed 5,000 people, so maybe feeding 5,000 took a little time, I'd guess. So let's say they got into the boat at about 10 o'clock. It's now 3 to 6 in the morning, and they've been battling the storm all night. They've been wondering, well, last storm we were in, Jesus was at the back of the boat and he's asleep, and we woke him up and he sorted this stuff out. But he's not here now. What do we do? They're in the boat and the storm is going crazy. The boat's filling with water. 2 years ago, we were sailing at Karib Dam with my brother and his sons, or son and his daughter. And I took my nephew, his son, out into Karib, and we were sailing. And it wasn't a storm, but it was windy. It was a strong wind. And we capsized, and we were sailing, and we capsized, and we ended up stuck in the water. And I don't know about you if you've been in that space, but it gets to a point where you're tiny. You're this little speck in the water. And you're treading water, and you finally we managed to right the boat and get back in, and the boat is still full of water, and the wind is blowing, and it's absolutely terrifying. You're exhausted. My mouth was so dry. It's drier than it is now. I couldn't drink. I couldn't talk. My tongue was like thick. There was water all around me. I'd been stuck in the water for 40 minutes, but I was dehydrated and I was tired. So I can understand these disciples. They've gone through the mill. They've been there all night. They're wondering, when is this thing going to end? And it says, in the fourth night of the watch, Jesus comes to them walking on the water. See, friends, you and I have to realize God's timing is not our timing. We know that. We've heard it said many a time. But in the reality of this story, they're at their wits' end. They're desperate for relief. They're desperate for the end. They're crying out, God, make it stop now. I've had enough, Lord. Get me out of this. How many times have we said that? Maybe we're praying for a loved one and we're asking God for healing and we don't see it coming. Or we're praying for a miracle in our finances and it just seems to be getting worse. And the storm is continually upon us. And we're saying, Lord, why don't you make it stop? I wonder if they were wondering, where's Jesus in all of this? But the Mark account tells us, chapter 6, verse 47, late that night the disciples were in the boat in the middle of the lake, and Jesus was alone on land. And he saw that they were in serious trouble, rowing hard and struggling against the wind and the waves. And at about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came to them walking on the water. See, friends, they're in the boat, they're in the storm, they're going there where Jesus wanted them to do. It's not that they were disobeying, this is not a punishment, this is not because they were in sin, they were where they needed to be. And they think they're alone, but Jesus is up on the mountain, and if you go to Jerusalem or to Israel and you go to the Sea of Galilee and you go to the mountain where they say this took place, you can stand there and you can look out and see the whole of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus could see them in the storm. Friends, I want to remind you this morning, the storm might be going crazy around you. The boat might be full of water. The debts might be over your head. Your health might be failing. Things might be going pear-shaped. But Jesus is He's there and He sees you. The disciples wanted Him in the boat. But He's on the mountain praying. But He sees them. Why did Jesus make them wait so long? Why the fourth watch? Was it He was just having some fun and wanted to see how they could handle it? I don't think so. He's a gracious God. He's a compassionate God. He's a loving God. See, friends, sometimes we go through a storm because it teaches us lessons that we need to learn now for the next season. I know in 2020, our company got liquidated. We all lost our jobs. It was a perfect storm. Things in our family fell apart. Everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. But you know what? I learned some lessons in that storm. I learned some ability to hold on and to keep going. But Jesus knew what the disciples needed. As I said, they were the first lesson in the storm. They recognized Jesus as the teacher and one who could calm the wind and the waves. But Jesus also knew that a time was coming when He wasn't going to be there. John chapter 16, verse 32, Jesus says, "Behold, the hour is coming, and indeed it has come, when you will be scattered each to his own home and will leave me. Yet I am not alone, for the Father is with me. And I have said these things to you, so that you may have peace in this world. You will have tribulations, but take heart, for I have overcome this world." You see, friends, Jesus knew that the disciples needed to learn that they could face a storm without Him. That they could get through it when He wasn't there. Because He was still there in prayer. He was still there watching them. He was still there involved in their story. See, often, in my experience, when the storm gets longer or more delayed or worse, my what-ifs get louder. What if you come now? What if this didn't happen, Jesus? What if you did this? What if they said that? And the what ifs and the questioning and the arguing gets louder. But friends, guess what? The what ifs can work the other way. What if the wind was against them, but what if the word is for them? What if you fail, but what if you don't? See, the real question is not what if. The real question is, Jesus, what are you trying to teach me? What are you showing me? What are you revealing to me about you and about me in this storm? So the storm is going crazy. Boat is filling with water. And Jesus has been praying. And now 3 o'clock in the morning, or between 3 and 6 in the morning, Jesus comes walking on the water. And the disciples think it's a ghost. And Peter, the bold one, cries out, Jesus, if it is you, or says, Lord, if it is you, tell me to come. And what happens? Jesus says one word. Come. Come on, Jesus. There's a storm going on. Things are falling apart. Life is going pear-shaped. Things are going crazy. And Jesus only has one word for Peter. Come. If I'm Peter, I'm thinking, Lord, do I put my left foot out? How do I balance? Do I put my right foot out? Do I throw my legs over the edge of the boat and then jump in at one time? Friends, so often we're waiting for God to say this long explanation. And Jesus gives one simple word. Come. Often in our lives, we're facing a difficult situation. And Jesus doesn't come with a coaching and do this, do that. He says one simple word. Come. Maybe he says, go say sorry. Or go share your testimony. Or love your wife. Honor your parents. Love your neighbor. Love yourself. Be honest. Pay your taxes. One word. See, friends, in the storm, we need to learn to hear God speak. And many times it's in the quiet place. And I know if we were to talk to you this morning and ask afterwards, there'd be many of us that would say, in the storm that I went through, I learned to hear God's voice. He spoke to me, that still small voice. He gave me that confidence. He gave me that assurance. You see, friends, why? Because the same word that told him to come is the same word that enables him to do it. As we sang this morning in that song, his word has power, his word has authority. And when he gives a word, he doesn't just throw it out there and expect nothing to happen. His words have meaning and his words have power, and he expects it to accomplish something in his life or in our lives. I've been wondering. So Peter gets out the boat, he starts walking. I can imagine this first step. And the waves are going, and it's not as we've seen in the movies or in the Bible story books where there's just a short distance. If you read the passage, I actually think Peter walked a fair bit. Because it says Jesus, they didn't recognize Jesus. Jesus was far enough away from them that they couldn't recognize him. We also read in John's account that as soon as Jesus, it says when Peter started to sink, Jesus immediately grabbed him and pulled him into the boat, and immediately they were on the shore. So either, as it happened, the boat suddenly got transported from the middle of the sea to the shore, which is a miracle in itself, or Peter walked a lot further than our Bible stories let us think he believed. And I would tend to go with the fact that Peter probably walked further because Jesus was still a long way off. The boat was in the middle, and by the time they got, Jesus immediately reached him and picked him up. They were where they were meant to be in Gennesaret. But what happens? Peter looks around, at everything around him. He looks at the storm. He looks at the waves. Can you imagine this for a moment? You're walking on water. Not a paddle here that we're walking on and splashing like we've seen in the videos and the movies, but actually walking on water. You can see the fish swimming underneath him. The waves are blowing against him, and he's walking, and the boat is over there. Jesus is over here, and he's walking towards Jesus, and he's on his own. Jesus has not yet reached out to him. He's not there yet, and he's not close enough to the boat to jump back in. And it says, but he saw what was on around him, and he started to sink. And immediately, Jesus picked him up, and they were on the boat, and they were where they needed to go. I wonder for a moment, in that moment when, as they came out of the water and they were on the boat, it says immediately the disciples worshipped him, and they said, truly, you are the Son of God. You see, friends, there's 4 miracles that took place in this story. The first one, Jesus walks on the water. Second one, Peter walks on the water. The third one, the storm is calm. But the fourth one, and the biggest one for us this morning, is the response of the disciples has gone from Jesus, you're a teacher, to Jesus, you're now the Messiah, you're the King, you're the one who's able to, you're the Son of God. And they worshipped Jesus. See, friends, what is our response in the storm? Do we respond in grumbling? As Greg always talks about, grumble copy or praise mountain. Are we in that place of the storm where we're grumbling and we're moaning about the condition of the storm or the waves or the condition of the boat or our lives? Or do we get to a place where, as the disciples did, in the middle of the storm, or at the end of the storm, they get to a place where they now worship and say, Jesus, you are the Son of God. The fourth miracle is a miracle of worship. They didn't understand, but they recognized who Jesus was. See, friends, when you and I go through storms, and as we've said, they all come. They're all there. And the incredible thing is you may not be in a storm now, but maybe there will be a storm next week. I don't need to prophesy that. We don't need to wait for it. We don't need to make it happen. But we know storms come. Jesus told us that there would be tribulation. Jesus told us we would go through difficult times. Friends, we either moan about the storm or we can become a student in the storm. And we can learn what Jesus wants us to learn about ourselves and about Him. So as I close off this morning, when you go through a storm, don't complain about how it makes you feel. Rather ask God, what lesson do you want me to learn in this storm? Why are you allowing this in my life? Second response in a storm. Believe that God is for you in the storm and is maturing and shaping your character and your faith. And then thirdly, worship God in the storm. That little phrase at the bottom of my notes here. Don't waste a good storm. Sounds silly. But I know, as I said, from sailing and playing around in boats, some of the best times of sailing is in the worst wind. Is in the roughest weather. I'm not saying we go looking for storms, but when a storm comes along, when things happen, don't waste it. Ask God, Lord, what are you showing me? What are you showing me about me? What are you showing me about you? As I said, the disciples, this was the second storm that they experienced with Jesus. And they got the lesson. He is the Son of God. He controls everything. See, when we encounter Jesus, we recognize that our peace doesn't come from the absence of a storm, but it comes from His word speaking over us. Can you stand together with me?
Thank you so much for being a part of our meeting today. Can I just ask two things? The first is, if today the message has in any way been useful to you, would you mind just maybe liking it or putting perhaps a statement down or a comment down that we can know how the ministry has helped you? Maybe a thumbs up, maybe you can subscribe to the channel, do whatever, just so we can know what impact this message may be having on you. And secondly, you may be someone who's saying, Greg, I hear you, and this hope that Jesus has for us can come into my heart and it can change me. But the reality is that I don't even know if I know Jesus. I want to say two things to you right away. The first is, He's near you right now. The Bible says if you believe in your heart that He is the Lord, and if you confess Him with your mouth, you will be saved. Which means you just need to, where you are, turn to the Lord Jesus Christ, even now, and just say, Lord, here I am. I recognize who you are. I confess my sin to you. I acknowledge you as Jesus Christ, the Lord of all, the Son of the living God. And I want to follow you. I want to become a disciple of yours. I want to give my life to you, Lord. And you can pray that prayer right now between you and the Lord. Secondly, you can get hold of us. You can see the telephone number. You can get hold of us and say, hey, I've given my life to the Lord. Can you help me from here on out? And we could either send you some material. We can put you in touch with a really good church near you. If you live in our area, you can come to us. You can follow us on YouTube. But it is good to get connected into the family of God, to get connected into a local church, that your life changes being surrounded with the family of God. Please stay in touch. God bless you.